You're listening to the Touchdown Under podcast with Jack, Emilian, Anthony, and Arif. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Touchdown Under podcast. This is episode 9. I'm Jack, your host, and as always, I'm joined by Emilian.
Hey, how's it going?
Anthony.
Good to be here.
And Arif.
Happy to be back.
Now, on today's podcast, we'll be going through our division power rankings, which we uploaded on our Instagram page at touchdown.under if you would like to follow along with us. But before we get into that, we will kick it off with our news segment. And making news this week in the NFL was the Washington football franchise, who has officially confirmed that it will officially undergo a name change after a thorough review of the team's name and brand. Boys, did Washington make the right decision here?
I think that they did, considering how much times have changed, and the term Redskin is a derogatory term, and it is offensive. I do think they made the right decision. Hopefully the name change is a good one. Hopefully, it ends up being a good rebrand.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Emilian. It's hard to say that the name Redskins was, a name that was looked upon lightly by the community. Clearly, there's a lot of tension between, the outside media and, the managing group of the Redskins, that the name wasn't suitable, didn't reflect, the standards of the community. So I reckon it is a good decision. Just like you said, Emilian, I hope they do rebrand correctly and come up with a good name for the team.
Yeah, it would be nice if it was a good name that I guess the majority of fans of the NFL appreciate. But I think it's just really important that they go through this process, and no matter what the name is, it should be changed, because the Redskins is quite offensive to Native American people.
Agreed. Now, onto news, which made news this morning, was the Washington Post has released a bombshell report in which 15 former female employees of the Washington football franchise spoke about a culture of verbal abuse and sexual harassment that went largely unpunished, compounded by a seemingly non-existent human resources department. For now, these are allegations and nothing is concrete, but it certainly looks as if there's even more scrutiny and controversy surrounding Washington's football organization. Boys, what do you reckon?
The Washington football organization, the management has been horrible for ages right now under, the ownership of Dan Snyder. And honestly, just the fact that it's happening with this organization, it makes me wonder if it's happening in other organizations as well. And it is quite concerning to see that, all of this is happening and it's being revealed right now.
Yeah, there's no way you can look at this, and there's no good that can come from a report like this at all, obviously. I think aside to this that probably hasn't been considered yet is probably like the effect it has on the players. Like, there'd probably rumors within the locker room that stuff is going on in the background in terms of the management of the franchise, and that can't have a good, a positive effect on the players. So I think in terms of how the team is performing, it wouldn't help, and it's probably some reason why the Redskins haven't been very good for such a long time. But also, like, ethically, this is just terrible news if it is indeed true.
The allegations are quite disturbing, honestly, especially some of the stuff that was said about just the passports being taken and them not being able to leave. Like, it's really disturbing, but the main thing is that all of this gets sorted, and we all can move on from this, because the Washington Redskins have been in the media quite a bit this off-season.
Yeah, obviously things have gotten from bad to worse for Washington. One concern I do have about this is if these allegations are in fact true, then I would have some serious concerns about the possibility of players actually being involved in what the coach and the owner were doing. And I feel like where there's smoke, there's fire. There may be more that comes out of this, more things that haven't been told yet. But I would really hope, if I was a Washington fan right now, that, my players weren't involved in what management was taking part in. In other league news, the deadline for franchise tagged players to work out extensions with their teams passed on Thursday morning. Players who were able to secure a long-term contract include Kansas City defensive lineman Chris Jones, Tennessee running back Derrick Henry, and Cleveland defensive lineman Myles Garrett. Boys, what do you think of these contracts?
I think that, Chris Jones is the best defensive player on his team. Derrick Henry's the best player. Derrick Henry and Myles Garrett are the best players on their team, in my opinion. So I think that, it's really important that these teams, make sure they have these players for the foreseeable future. And I think they did a good job in locking them up. It's good to see. And then we'll get to the, players who didn't secure a contract, but I don't think those players are as valuable as these three here.
Yeah, building on what you said, Million, I think the players that you've listed, Jack, they're not just stars, they're pillars to the teams. They're not, they're essential. They need to keep them if they're to have that, productivity, especially the defensive players. Myles Garrett, essential to his team. Derrick Henry, we saw, how crucial he is. So it's important that, these guys signed on.
It'll be interesting to see in the future how all of these teams' cap space that you mentioned, Jack, will be affected, because in regards to Kansas City, they had to re-sign Patrick Mahomes to a huge, almost $50 million a year contract. They also have another fellow D lineman, Frank Clark, who's on $20 million a year. So although this was very important for them to bring Chris Jones back, I'm very curious to see how this will affect them financially in the future.
That's a really good point you raised there, Riff. Obviously, with Mahomes being signed to that massive contract, I was frankly quite surprised. They ended up signing Chris Jones. I think it may prove detrimental to their cap space in the future. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, with Derrick Henry re-signing in Tennessee, I think that was really important for them. I honestly wasn't expecting him to sign. I thought he'd play out his franchise tag and then maybe test free agency. But now that they've got him locked down for the future and, they've got Tannehill at quarterback, I think there's a real chance for them to really build on, what they started last season. As for Garrett, I don't know necessarily if I agree with you, Amelia, that he's the best player on there. He's definitely the best defensive player there, and it was obvious that they get him locked in for another 5 years. Now, notable players who have a long-term contract and will play out their one-year deals include Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott, Arizona running back Kenyon Drake, Minnesota safety Anthony Harris, and Denver safety Justin Simmons. Boys, what kind of impact do we think these guys not signing will have on their teams?
As I said before, these players aren't, as important to the team, in my opinion, as the ones who did sign these long-term contracts. I mean, sure, Dak Prescott is a quarterback and that is valuable. I just think that maybe a change of quarterback on the Cowboys is probably a good idea. With Shaquille Barrett, I think that, one incredible season doesn't justify, being a great player. He's had that one great season, but he hasn't proven that he can replicate that going forward. Kenyon Drake, I'm surprised that he didn't sign a long-term deal. I think that, the Cardinals played really well with him, and hopefully, he re-signs with them in free agency next year. With the other two safeties, I think that, it's not essential that they keep them, but I think, they're really good players, and any team would benefit from having them.
Yeah, I think the biggest story out of all these names, he has to be Dak Prescott for the Cowboys. For the looks of things, I honestly don't see him being there in the long term. You never know what could play out in the future, but just the fact that he, is demanding so much, so he's expecting to get paid a lot, and he's not going to get that. Well, so the Cowboys have signified so far. I think it's a big story, but yeah, like you said, a million with Shaquille Barrett, one good season, not proving, your worth for a big contract. I reckon that's definitely fair enough. And yeah, basically the gist of this is that basically with the players that did get signed, like Chris Jones, Derrick Henry, and Myles Garrett, they're the pillars on the defense and offense for their teams, where these players aren't so much that, and therefore that's why I haven't gotten that big contract yet.
Yeah, I don't see Dak Prescott returning to Dallas either, especially considering he turned down a contract that was worth over $100 million guaranteed. So I don't see how the Cowboys can really better that offer without that impacting them severely financially in the future. And I definitely agree with your point, Emilian, about Shaquille Barrett. I think it would have been a pretty big mistake if they gave him some kind of money in like the 20 million per year range after just that one season. As incredible as it was, you don't know if he'll be able to perform at that level again. In regards to the two safeties, especially Anthony Harris, I feel like the Minnesota secondary has really taken a step back already this offseason. And if they were to lose Anthony Harris next season, I'm not sure how they would really be able to cope with that. So I think it's important that they lock down Anthony Harris and Denver locks down Justin Simmons as well in the long term.
You make some good points there, Riff. I just want to mention with Dak Prescott, I don't know where he thinks he's getting like the offer he got from Jerry Jones. I don't know where else he thinks he's going to get money from. Like, who is going to offer anywhere near that amount of money apart from Jerry Jones? Jerry Jones is the only guy who will give Dak Prescott that much money, and he still turned it down. Honestly, I hope he doesn't stay in Dallas. I wouldn't mind seeing Andy Dalton get a run there next season, but not signing long-term is on Dak here. He got the offer that he should have taken and didn't. That's on him. Andy Dalton is really not that much of a step down in that offense, I believe. As for Harris, Arif, I agree. He's after who they lost in the offseason, Harris becomes a massive part of that defense. And after being undrafted, he's turned out to be a really nice ad for them. And it would be a shame if they would lose him now after not being able to sign him long term.
Yeah, Dalton, I like the point you made about Andy Dalton possibly starting next season. I think especially since he played at the Cincinnati Bengals his entire career and they weren't exactly like an elite team and he never really got to show his arm talent. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens next season.
I agree. Now, with that out of the way, we can move on to our division power rankings, and we'll be discussing our rankings from 8 through to 1. And just before we get into it, I would like to rankings off of the strength of the teams in these divisions. You know, we're not basing it, specifically off of competitiveness. It's mainly based on the strength of each of the teams in this division. So at number 8, we have the NFC East, and Philadelphia Eagles carry this division. They're the best team in this division by far. Not only are they playoff contenders, I think they can make a real push for the number 1 seed in the NFC if they can stay relatively injury-free. The Cowboys are, considered playoff contenders as they are every season, really, but I just don't see it. I don't see them really pushing for one of those playoff spots. And obviously, as for the Redskins and Giants, they have, more extensive long-term. They're both rebuilding. It'll take a few more seasons for them to become relevant in the playoff picture.
Yeah, I think, as you said, Jack, this is clearly the worst division in the league. I think the Eagles and Cowboys are the only viable teams to make the playoffs, and even then, I don't think either of them are good enough to get a first-round bye. I know you think differently, Jack, but I just think that these are two good teams, maybe great at very best for the Eagles. On the other side of the division, you have the Redskins and the Giants, who are two of the worst teams in the league, and they haven't significantly improved enough this offseason for them to be taken more seriously, and that severely hurts this division's viability in this list. They do have two very young quarterbacks. So I guess my question to any of you guys is, do you think Daniel Jones and Dwayne Haskins can improve these teams to this season to elevate the division?
I think Dwayne Haskins out of the two is the most likely to have the biggest impact on his team, just because of the kind of breakout talent they're having on that roster. I mean, in many of our episodes, we've talked about the emergence of Terry McLaurin. I think if Haskins is able to get going, that will be very beneficial because they used to play with each other at Ohio State. I know Daniel Jones showed at times last season that he's capable, but I don't think he has the kind of upside that Dwayne Haskins does.
I disagree there, Riff. I didn't see much from Haskins last season at all to be able to say that he's got promise. Compared, especially in that Tampa Bay game, really showed what he can do, and he really proved doubters wrong of his throwing abilities, accuracy. I feel like with a stable offensive line, he could end up doing a lot of damage in this league. I definitely think he has a better play projection than Haskins does, and therefore I feel like the Giants are in a better position, for the future as compared to the Redskins. Anthony.
Yeah. As you said, Daniel Jones played out like the full season when Dwayne Haskins didn't, started only a few games. We haven't seen enough of Dwayne Haskins at this moment to say he's definitively better than Daniel Jones. I think it's up to that offensive line because especially rookie quarterback going up against, in that kind of offense with that kind of offensive line, it's a big ask for him to step up and, perform really well. And especially in that division, we can't expect much from both of them. But I think we've seen more of Daniel Jones, and that alone just proves that he's probably the better quarterback at the moment. But going forward, we could see anything, between these two teams. They're probably equally matched in terms of their form and their skill at the moment. So, yeah.
On to number 7, and we have the AFC East. The Patriots' offense was really predictable last season with Brady under center, but with Newton now, they really take on a whole new identity. And honestly, I still think they're the best team in this division and a really sneaky playoff dark horse. Obviously, the Bills will continue to get better, and they have every chance to beat out the Patriots for the division title. But those two teams are what carries this division. Obviously, you've got the Jets and the Dolphins there as well. I feel like the Jets have potential with Darnold especially. They drafted Denzel Mims. I like him a lot. They've got a pretty decent defense if they can keep Jamal Adams, which I don't know if they can. But they do have potential, as do the Dolphins. But I think with those two teams, we'll have to wait a little bit longer until they start really delivering on their promise.
I like the point you made there, Jack, about the potential of the Jets. I think that Sam Darnold is, one of those QBs that, has a really high ceiling. And I think, the biggest problem with the Jets offense is that the offensive line just wasn't where it needs to be. And Sam Darnold didn't really have any weapons to throw to. So, considering what he's been able to do with what he has, it's really, it makes a good impression on the future. Regarding the Bills and the Patriots, I definitely think that the Bills have the division. It's theirs to lose at the moment. I think their defense is just getting better and better. I think Josh Allen is getting better and better. And, the addition of Stephon Diggs just adds a deep threat to that offense. That doesn't mean the Patriots are out of the running either. I mean, they still have a good chance of winning it with the newly signed Cam Newton. As for the Dolphins, I do think a lot of people have overlooked the changes they've made in the offseason. They started by drafting Tua Tagovailoa, then they acquired Matt Breida for some speed in the run game, and they strengthened the defense with Kyle Van Noy and Byron Jones. So I really think that the Dolphins, can elevate themselves definitely from what they did last season. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, point you made about the Jets. So obviously they have got Le'Veon Bell a couple of seasons ago. Hadn't produced nearly enough to the level he did in Pittsburgh. So in the draft this season, the Jets went out and got offensive tackle Mekhi Becton in the first round, right? When a team does that, I really think, obviously they're emphasizing, of course, trying to fix their offensive line, but especially they know that they have a 3-time Pro Bowl in Le'Veon Bell, and being able to fix that offensive line will do a lot for rebuilding that team, to go forward, become more competitive in the division. I think looking at that division as a whole, it's kind of like two subdivisions. You got New England and the Bills on that top tier, and you got the Jets and the Dolphins, and that clearly rebuilding phase. I think it'd be really interesting to see just Patriots and the Bills play each other in the season, because I reckon they're last season they were obviously the Patriots were probably the better team in the end, but the Bills weren't that far off from winning both of the games they played against New England. They lost by less than a touchdown in the end. So I reckon with loss of Tom Brady, bringing in Cam Newton, and the Bills bringing in Stephon Diggs, I think that this division, at least the top half of this division, is pretty even.
When I first saw Brady leave the Patriots, I was a bit concerned, I guess. I think my concerns have kind of disappeared when I thought about how good their defense actually is. I mean, they have one of the best defenses in the league. And then they went ahead and got Cam Newton on a very, very low money contract. So it's a very low risk contract there. I think that the Bills and Patriots, as you guys have mentioned, will stay. They're probably the only two teams with a chance at the playoffs. I also liked your point, Anthony, about the Jets almost like commitment to fixing their run game. They do have an incredible player at running back in Le'Veon Bell, and they really, I guess, asserted themselves when in the draft they selected Mekhi Becton. He's an absolute monster. He's like 6'8", 365 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
If that's not a commitment to the run game, I don't know what is, especially since they went out and got some incredibly fast receivers.
Yeah, also, I reckon Le'Veon Bell, watching that draft at home and seeing them get a offensive tackle player in the first round, he'd be pretty pumped up to start the season, knowing he's got some good protection, on that offensive line. Yeah.
I have a question for all of you guys. Out of the two young quarterbacks that were taken in the same draft in the top 10, Josh Allen and Sam Darnold, who do you guys hold more optimism for in the future?
I think that right now, if we're talking about near future, the next 3 years, I would say Josh Allen, because he's got a better team around him. I think that he can really thrive, of having a great defense and now having, some viable. But I think, put Sam Darnold in the Bills team and that Bills offense, he could definitely flourish and also, be a great quarterback.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard debate to have because you don't. They're not obviously in two different teams, one at a completely different level to another. So I mean, at this point, we've seen what Josh Allen can do in the Bills. So you have to say he would be the better quarterback out of those two. But then again, if Sam Darnold got drafted to the Bills and it was like inverted, you could say we would never. I reckon that Sam Darnold could definitely have had the same production, if not even more, than Josh Allen has had with the Bills.
It's a good question you ask there, Arif. And it's a good point you make, Emilian, because as you guys know, I definitely hold Darnold in a higher regard than I do Josh Allen. If Darnold was playing in Buffalo, I feel like they'd have even better prospects as a team. But Josh Allen isn't bad. I just don't really think – I think he's got accuracy issues, and I don't know whether we're going to see those kinds of issues resolve anytime soon. But with Darnold, the point you guys made about Mekhi Becton is obviously relevant for Bell, but it's also just as relevant for Darnold because it helps by extension. And as they continue to build around Darnold in New York, I think they will eventually start threatening, the Patriots and the Bills, but not this season. And but Emilian, you made a good point a little bit earlier about what the Dolphins did this offseason. And I really liked, the additions they made on defense. I think they signed one of the best defensive backs in the game in Byron Jones. They added some really, really quality veteran presence in Carl Van Noy, and obviously they've got Tua who can, learn behind Fitzpatrick for however long he needs to. But obviously you've got those two good teams at the top and those two developmental teams, as you said, Anthony. And I think that's really where this division is right now.
Yeah.
At number 6, we have AFC South. I think there are 3 really decent teams in the AFC South, and I think this division has the potential to be really formidable. Obviously, the Colts have multiple areas, versus Jacoby's veteran leadership, And they've got receivers there. In T.Y. Hilton, you've got Jack Doyle at tight end, Pascal. They've got targets there, and they've got a good offensive line. You've got Quentin Nelson there at guard. I like what they did on defense as well, trading for DeForest Buckner. They obviously got Justin Houston there as well. The Texans, Sean Watson's still there. Good young wide receivers. They've got Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, KK Kute. They've got a good defense still. JJ Watt, he's aging, but he's still there. And you obviously is mostly kept their 2019 squad intact. And they also lifted a really large burden off their shoulders by extending Derrick Henry. So I think there are 3 really good teams, and I really don't know who's going to win the division this year.
Yeah, as far as, competition goes, I think this is one of the best divisions in the league, where you've got 3 teams that are all on the same level. In my opinion, I think the Texans are going to slightly decline. I think the Titans are going to slightly improve. I think the Colts, as you mentioned, Jack, the changes they've made, I think are going to benefit them greatly, especially with Phillip Rivers. I mean, the problems he had last year were really that he didn't move around the pocket and he didn't have a good offensive line. So now he's in an offense, with one of the best offensive lines in the league, and I think he'll really benefit from that. It is going to be a battle between those 3 teams to win the division, and I think it's quite underrated because you look at the past 3 years, and they've been able to send 2 teams to the playoffs. So I guess my question is to Arif, I'd say, do you think the AFC South will have 2 teams in the playoffs this season, or will the winner of the division be the only team there?
I'm almost certain that there will be 2 teams in the playoffs next season, especially with that added wildcard spot. I think that really gives almost even an opportunity for there to be, 3, because I look at these 3 teams and I just see a lot of, especially with the Texans and Titans, they brought back so many of their starters that already took them to the playoffs. And then you have the Colts, as you mentioned, with their, with their nice young offensive line, which will really help Phillip Rivers play as a pocket passer. I think the Titans are a team that I think are almost a lock to make the playoffs. And I think the Texans and Colts possibly will be battling for a wild card spot.
Yeah, I believe for me the Colts will I anticipate they'll be the biggest improvers in this division. They acquired DeForest Buckner, in the offseason, which instantly adds talent to the defensive line. Additionally, adding Xavier Rhodes will hopefully allow him to return to career best form, which he had in 2016 with the Vikings. If that can happen, there will be another terrific addition for their secondary. Additionally, we mentioned before, Phillip Rivers coming to the Colts will add a more stable veteran presence, I reckon. Which they've had shaky quarterback play in the past. Andrew Luck getting injured, Jacoby Brissett having to come in. I think if Phillip Rivers can stay healthy in Indianapolis, I reckon they can finally go deep into the playoffs for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, the Colts defense is looking much improved. I mean, obviously you mentioned DeForest Buckner and Xavier Rhodes, but they got some young players coming up, as we mentioned in previous episodes. Kenny Moore, Darius Leonard, and then obviously the ageless wonder, Justin Houston. So there's a real possibility there for a playoff push.
I also want to mention that, having the Jaguars in this division severely holds it back from being, in the top 4. I think that, they're such a kind of like a dumpster fire team at the moment. They lost all their key pieces. They crumbled from their 2017 season. I mean, I hope they can get back on track.
That's a good point you're making, Million. And it's a good question you ask about how many teams they send to the playoffs. I think, there's every chance they could send 3 teams, but I definitely think they will at least send 2. On to number 5 now, and we have the AFC West. I think this division has a lot of potential, but I'm not really sure that I buy into it just yet. The Chiefs are obviously the headline act of this division. But I think after that, the Broncos and Chargers have a lot of talent, especially defensively, which could possibly elevate them to playoff contention this season. However, both Denver and the Chargers, they have large question marks hovering over their quarterback play. We haven't seen quite enough from Drew Lock to be able to say he's the definitive franchise quarterback. And obviously there's a question mark in Los Angeles with Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert. So we'll see how that pans out. For me, the Raiders are the team that I have the least faith in. They improved in a few areas of the offseason, especially at linebacker, but I do not believe that they will challenge for a playoff spot this season. There's just not enough there for me to believe that they can make it in a tough AFC.
I think that this division should be higher on this list. And the reason for that is I believe that every team here has a legitimate chance at making the playoffs. You mentioned, Jack, that you have the least faith in the Raiders when they were, they were so close to actually making the playoffs last season. They strengthened their linebacker core, which is one of their biggest problems. I think they've definitely still got a chance to make the playoffs next season. As you mentioned with Drew Lock, we haven't seen enough of him. But I mean, I liked what I saw from the Broncos, once he started playing. And I think if he can, kind of play at that similar level, I think they're definitely, a chance of playing a wild card spot. The Chargers, they have a big question mark at quarterback, but I think that, a lot of the reasoning for the poor QB play was, as I said before with Rivers, he didn't move around in the pocket enough, and behind that offensive line, that's not good. Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert, they're both much more mobile than Phillip Rivers, so I think if they, can get a bit of movement in the pocket, avoid sacks, it's going to help the Chargers offense a lot. And I do believe that the additions they've made on defense, mainly with Chris Harris, is going to elevate the entire defense enough to maybe carry that offense. And it certainly doesn't hurt this division that, you've got the best team in the league in the Chiefs. They're obviously going to win it again. But that's not to say there are any bad teams in this division. I think there's one elite team, and then there's 3 average to good teams.
I definitely agree with you, Million. There's no way you can say that there's, any more than just one. The Chiefs are definitely the elite team here. The Broncos, Raiders, and Chargers, are not elite. No other team in this division had a winning record but the Chiefs. And, I mean, I'm not sold that this division should be where it is on the list at 5th, ahead of, like, the AFC South that we had at 6th. I feel like, I mentioned before, I feel like AFC South is like 3 legitimate competitors and 1 not so good team. I feel like this is not completely inversed, but I feel like the difference between the Chiefs and then the rest of the division is just too much. I mean, I think you mentioned, Million, there's a lot of the massive question mark at quarterback for the Chargers. I'm not sold that Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert can solve the issues that they have. Even if they're more mobile, I'm not sold on them adjusting to playing under a different quarterback, considering they've played under Phillip Rivers for the last decade. So yeah, I'm not sold that this division should be rated on this list.
I just want to go back to your point, Anthony. You said that the AFC South has 3 competitive teams. I agree, it's a more competitive division as to who will win it, but the AFC South doesn't have a team that's on the level of the Chiefs. And the AFC West doesn't have a team that's as bad as the Jaguars. And that's why I think the AFC West is definitely a lot stronger than the AFC South.
Yeah, but I think AFC West is not as well-rounded. Like you have I know the Jags are way, way off from the rest of the AFC South, but you have what? Okay, so in the AFC South you have 2 teams had a winning record last season. The Colts just missed out. But with the AFC West, you have 3 teams with a losing record. And the Chiefs had won 6 games more than the second place Broncos in that division. That just shows how much of a gap there is in this division.
I agree with you there. That's a really good point, Anthony, because obviously the AFC West, their worst team is the Raiders, and they are better than the Jaguars, you could say, even though the Jaguars beat them last season. The Raiders are probably better than the Jaguars. However, if you look at the 3 teams they have, obviously you've got the Chiefs, who are better than everyone else, but then the Titans, the Texans, and the Colts are all better than the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Raiders. Those 3 teams they're closer to the Chiefs than they are to those other teams. The Titans are close to where the Chiefs are. They're close to their level. And you've got those 3 teams in the AFC South who are, I'd say they are, considerably better than how the Broncos and Chargers played last season, especially the Raiders. I just wanted to make a point Emilian, you're talking about how the Raiders were very close last season. I don't know if they deserve to be as close as they were. That they had a reasonably easy schedule. They came up against teams like the Lions. They played the Chargers twice. They played the Bengals, Jets, Jaguars. They lost 34-3 against the Jets. They lost at home against the Jaguars.
Jack, I definitely agree. The Raiders didn't deserve to be in the playoffs last season. I'm just saying that, they were close. If they had won, some of those more important games against weaker teams, then they definitely would have been there. And I hope that they can fix, those issues of, not being able to play when it matters. But yeah.
I think the AFC South, I agree with your point, Anthony. I think the AFC South should be above the AFC West. And my reasoning for that is not too dissimilar from what you guys have said. But I'd also like to make the point that with the Broncos and Raiders, they have the potential to be two teams that can compete with the Chiefs in the future. It's just that they're really unproven. Like, as you mentioned, Jack, we're not sure what we're going to get from Drew Lock. We haven't seen a whole lot so far. They also have, two of their starting receivers will be rookies. They have Melvin Gordon, who just came into town. On defense, Jarrell Casey just came. Like, they got a lot of new players that maybe haven't really. They'll have to get used to the Denver system and playing in that altitude and that kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of variables that they'll have to overcome to make them a good team. And same with the Raiders. I kind of see I see where you're coming from, Emilian, about them, possibly making a playoff push, but I'm not sure if they can do it in the coming season. I think out of those three teams, the Chargers, if they can get their quarterback situation going, I think they have the best chance, especially with their incredible secondary consisting of Chris Harris Jr., Casey Hayward Jr., and Derwin James. But Kansas City is undoubtedly the favorite to win this division.
On to the NFC North now at number 4. The NFC North is another really competitive division with no clear standout team as the favorite to win the division. I see the Bears improving after a disappointing 2019 campaign. I see the Packers regressing in Matt LaFleur's second year at the helm. And it's a real mystery considering all the changes they made in the offseason, especially on defense. I think the Lions will improve slightly, but not quite enough to elevate them into the playoff conversation. But overall, it's a pretty competitive division, and I feel like the Packers, Vikings, and Bears all have a chance at playoffs, and they really all have a chance at being pretty decent teams. And I think that's what elevates this division to where it is in our rankings.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this division is on the same level as the AFC South. I think it's really competitive because there are 3 teams that are all, at that good level. But none of these teams are actually great, in my opinion. I think the Packers were lucky to be 13-3 last season. As you said, Jack, I also predict a regression from them. The Vikings went 10-6 last year, and they lost key pieces this offseason. So I think there's a big question mark, regarding them. And I don't think the Bears will be able to return to their 2018 form with either Trubisky or. And the Lions also hold this division back. I think that if Stafford could stay healthy, they'd be around, the 5-11, 6-10 mark. So, it's a good division. You've got 3 solid good teams there, and then 1 bad team. Anthony, do you believe that there is an elite team in this division?
No, I definitely don't think there's an elite team. I think, you could make a case that. Actually, no. There's no elite team in this division. I just think there's too many question marks surrounding the Packers, Vikings, and Bears. The Lions would only assume that they get better coming off their 3-win season last year. As you mentioned, Jack, the top 3 teams, based on the standings last year, there's so many question marks, surrounding each one of them. Can the Packers offense, get back to the level that they were at in 2019? Can the Vikings, can they overcome all the issues with, losing key defensive players? And the Bears, can they return to the 2018 level of their defense? I think there's a lot of cases to say, yes, these teams can, and equally as much to say these teams can't. So I think come the middle of the season, this could be a very different NFC North to what we have it on our standings now. It could be a lot worse division, could be a lot better. But I think at the moment it's pretty even. That's why we have it fourth.
Yeah, I really liked your comparison of the NFC North to the AFC South, Amelia. I think there's kind of like some similar things there. I think that Anthony, you're right in saying there's probably not an elite team in this division, but I think if we had to pick one, or if I had to pick one, sorry, I think I'd pick the Packers just based off Aaron Rodgers' talent and his ability to just, almost kind of carry the team on his back. He's got a really good offensive line. I think most teams with above average offensive lines have the ability to be an elite team, and obviously their defense is quite good as well. But this division does have a lot of question marks, and I'll be interested to see how it all turns out next season.
I agree with. I don't think there is an elite team in this division, but the team that would come closest would have to be Green Bay, based on obviously who's under center for them, as well as how they played last season. They did play well. It was wasn't the best 13-3 season we've ever seen, but they did. They were 13-3. They played good football. I think they're worthy of being mentioned in the elite discussion, but I don't think they're elite either. I think for one of these three teams to become elite again this season, but we'll just have to wait and see. At number 3 on our rankings, we have the AFC North. And while the Ravens are the clear standout here, in my opinion, I see the Browns and the Steelers pushing for a wild card playoff spot. Cincinnati obviously won't challenge in 2020, but if Joe Burrow shows enough promise throughout his rookie campaign, they could be primed for a playoff push either in 2021 or 2022. Overall, this division is pretty stacked. And I think once the Bengals join the party in the coming seasons, it could end up being a 4-horse race with the Browns and Steelers continuing to, try and move up to the level of Baltimore.
Yeah, this is a division that has just so much talent. It's hard to rank them lower than third on this list. I mean, the Ravens are obviously one of the best teams in the league. But for me, the most interesting part in this division is the Steelers and the Browns. Last season, the Steelers defense, it was incredible, and it almost carried them to the playoffs. They had terrible QB play, and their offense suffered from that. Their defense was able to, consistently stay at an elite level. And I think with a healthy Ben Roethlisberger, I'm sure they'll compete for the division title this season. I don't think the Ravens are going to be as good here as they were last year. The Browns on paper are an incredible team, and I think a lot of their failure last year can be attributed to Freddie Kitchens. That being said, it is a make or break year for Baker Mayfield, and if he can play at a similar level to his rookie season, I don't see why the Browns can't also compete for the division as well as the Steelers and the Ravens. I do want to ask Arif, because you've got a lot of concerns about Roethlisberger. Do you reckon if he stays healthy and plays at the level we're used to seeing from him, and that if Baker Mayfield plays at that 2018 level, do you think that the Ravens still win the division?
That's a good question, Emilian. Especially, obviously, we have to consider the quarterback play. But I think the real thing here is the Steelers' defense. I think they have the ability to rattle someone like Lamar Jackson, and if they could possibly win those 2 division games against the Ravens, that would put them in a really good place to maybe even jump them in the division. I do have some concerns about Roethlisberger staying healthy, especially since he got injured in the first or second game in the season in 2019. But yes, if he is able to stay healthy, I don't see why they can't even topple the Ravens for the division team. Obviously, the Ravens are a really talented team and great to watch, but it is really interesting to me to see if, even the Browns, if they could rattle Lamar Jackson, try and keep him in the pocket with players such as Myles Garrett, it'll be really interesting to see.
I just want to make a point about the Browns, right? So obviously last season, their ability to perform was hindered by their the coach in Freddie Hitchens. So they've gone off in the offseason, sacked him, and they've gotten Kevin Stefanski, the offensive coordinator from Minnesota. I really hope personally, it's not proven that any coach can just go in and fix the Browns. I've seen that countless times over so many years that, a lot of coaches can't, take the Browns to that next level. But I hope, with the roster they have, as you mentioned, Amelia, they have stars all over that roster on paper. Hopefully this is the break that they're looking for, and that they can, become competitive with the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns. If the Browns can get to that same level as the Steelers and the Ravens to compete for the division, I can't see this not going down to the wire, like the last play, like we saw again against the 49ers and Seahawks, where it came down to that last play to decide the division. We have every reason this could happen again in this division this year.
Emilian, I liked your point about Baker Mayfield and this being a make or break year for him. Obviously, Freddie Kitchens is gone, and I think he's out of excuses. I think, if he doesn't step up his game this season, I think he's trending towards bust status. And, God forbid the Browns will once again be looking for a new quarterback in the draft. So hopefully he can, help the Browns elevate, up to that real division title contender kind of spot where I think the Ravens and Steelers both are at this point. On to number 2 in our rankings now, and we have the NFC South. I think the NFC South is a pretty top-heavy division. The Saints and the Buccaneers are likely to be true Super Bowl contenders. However, I think after those two teams, there's a sizable drop-off. At this point in time, the Falcons and Panthers are mediocre at best, in my opinion. Both teams obviously made changes this offseason, but until we see it actually, unfold on the field, these two teams are what, is holding back this division from being number 1.
Yeah, a lot of the attention in this division goes to the Saints, as you said, Jack, and the Bucks. They're two powerhouse teams, and I think they both, have the potential to go 13-3. But I do want to talk about the Falcons. I think a lot of people are overlooking them because they didn't have a particularly good season last year. But I do think that the 7-9 record is misleading because of how different they looked in each half. I mean, they were 1-7 going into week 10, and they managed to win 6 of their last 8 games. I really do like what I saw, in that last stretch of games. They managed to beat the top seed of 49ers. And I think it just shows that they've still got a great roster. You've got Matt Ryan, Julio, Jared, Dante Fowler, and Deion Jones on the defense. So I still think that they're definitely going to be able to compete for a wildcard spot, especially now with the new playoff format with 3 wildcard teams. With the Panthers, I'm not really sure what to expect from them. I mean, they've got a new quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater, and it is an upgrade over Kyle Allen. And they've got one of the best players in the league in Christian McCaffrey. They've got some solid receivers. But I think that the departure of Luke Kuechly, his retirement is going to hurt this team a lot. I think he was the anchor of that defense, and I don't think it'll be any good without him. Jack, do you think that, Kuechly's absence will make the Panthers one of the worst teams in the league?
I think Kuechly is a massive loss for this Panthers defense. They also lost to James Bradbury at cornerback. I think their defense will be pretty subpar this season. However, adding over someone like Kyle Allen, and so I feel like as a whole, as a team, they will improve slightly from last season. However, I don't think they will, improve to the point where they can be included in, the playoff contention discussion.
So in the first half of the season, the Falcons, they didn't perform very well at all. They went, they lost most of the games, and after that, they won 6 out of their last 8 games. The defense was a massive talking point in the first half of the season, conceding over 30 points on a regular occasion. But then towards the second half of the season, the defense got much better. But in the draft, they drafted 4 defensive players out of their 6 picks. Do you guys think that the Falcons deliberately went to that draft, trying to fix their defense based on what happened in the first half of the 2019 season?
Well, clearly, if they're picking only defensive players and defense is clearly a priority for them, I don't think they had to improve much about their offense, considering they picked up Hayden Hurst, who is pretty underrated on the Ravens. Obviously, they lost Austin Hooper, but I think their offense as a whole didn't need much improvement compared to their defense. So I was really surprised that they went to their
If they can get those
they
rookies
prioritized the defense in the
going, I
draft.
think it will go a ways to getting them, possibly pushing for that, 7th wildcard spot. But with the division that we're going to talk about next, I think that's highly unlikely. I think the Saints and the Buccaneers will clearly be, competing for that division spot, possibly even like a first round bye, possibly the number 1 seed in the conference. So in regards to the Panthers, I do like your guys' point about, Luke Kuechly. The loss of Luke Kuechly, I think, will impact them quite a bit. Just looking at their linebacking corps now, it's not going to be anywhere near that level that they had last season. So I reckon they'll possibly stay around the same kind of level, maybe a bit higher with Bridgewater, but I guess we'll find out.
On to number 1 now of our division power rankings, and we have the NFC West. And I think the NFC West is the clear choice here at number 1. The 49ers and the Seahawks look primed to be just as good, if not better, than they were last season. Additionally, I'm predicting a Rams bounce-back season after a horror 2019 campaign. And finally, the Cardinals are set to make a massive leap, after having one of the best off-seasons imaginable. I mean, they really struck out in the draft. They got Isaiah Simmons, who's just a really, really good prospect. Obviously, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins, that they went to the offensive line for help. They really had a really great offseason. And as much as I think San Francisco are the favorites in this division, it could end up even being a 4-horse race for the title.
With the Cardinals increasing so much this offseason, it's really boosted their legitimacy in the division. I wouldn't go as far as saying the Rams had a horror show season last year. I think it was definitely a disappointing one, but they still went 9-7. They were close to a wild card spot. If we had the extra team last season, the Rams would have made the playoffs. So I think that, they're definitely going to improve this season. I think, they just had, a Super Bowl hangover. But I definitely think they're still a great team, and they're going to compete with the 49ers and the Seahawks for the division. Regarding those two teams, I think that, they haven't really changed all that much past year. Obviously, the 49ers, they've lost, DeForest Buckner, and they've lost Emmanuel Sanders. They've got rookies in there to, replace them. So if those rookies, can live up to the expectations, the 49ers are going to be just as good, if not better. The addition of DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals is huge. And I think, the Cardinals' biggest problem on offense with last year was, the fact that Kyler Murray was a rookie and he had very limited weapons. I think the addition of Hopkins just elevates the team so much more. Honestly, I think any of these teams has a very legitimate chance to make the playoffs. I think that, we could even see 3 teams go there.
Yeah, and then your point about the Rams not having a horror season, I feel like it kind of was a horror season when you think about the heights that they went to the season previous. Most were expecting them to win at Super Bowl and then for them to come back and challenge again. But really, last season they looked like a shell of their former selves. They beat a lot of bad teams. That they didn't really beat anyone really good. It was really quite a disappointing campaign, and we thought the Falcons had a Super Bowl hangover as well, but they have not been the same since. I don't know. I mean, I think they will bounce back to some extent, but I'm not sure if they can get back to that level that they were in 2018.
I think for me, when obviously the NFC West, undoubtedly the best division for me. I think what proves that is just, I mentioned it before when I was making a point about the AFC North, how such a close division with so many, competing teams that can all win, get close to winning the division. It creates that, brilliant finish, which we saw last year between the 49ers and Seahawks. I think that shows us just, especially with the additions that the Cardinals have made, and the Rams have made, it just shows how, this division is made, to be competitive, to be close, because both teams, all teams are so, so skilled and talented. So I'm expecting this to be another close finish.
Honestly, there's a possibility that all of these teams could have a 7-9 or 8-8 or better record. I think when you look at the Cardinals, Their biggest question mark is whether their offensive line can help Kyler Murray because he's an incredible talent. He's got one of the best receivers in the league now in Hopkins. And, their defense is pretty impressive as well. They added a lot of speed. In regards to the Rams, they lost Brandon Cooks, but I think they'll be able to make up for that. They lost Gurley again. They got Cam Akers in the draft. I reckon they'll be okay. It's just all about, I think the key is in this division, whether they can beat the 49ers and Seahawks in their division games. We all know that the 49ers and Seahawks had an incredible season last season. My question to you, Emilian, is do you think the 49ers or the Seahawks will win the NFC West in 2020?
Well, I think it's definitely going to be a battle between those two. I mean, the Rams could definitely shock the world and, compete as well, but I definitely think right now it's between the Seahawks and the 49ers. And if I had to make a guess now, I'd say it's the Seahawks. And the reason for that is, they didn't really lose anyone on the offense. They did lose Clowney on defense, but, he still may sign back. But the Seahawks, were one play away from winning the division last year. And we have to keep in mind that, they lost both Chris Carson and Rashad Penny. They did not have a run game for that last game. And the fact that they were so close shows really how good the team is as a whole under Russell Wilson.
Now that wraps up our Division Power Rankings episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't already, make sure you follow us on Instagram. That is at touch.down.under. That is where you can find all of our podcast content, as well as content which we produce and don't talk about on podcasts. So make sure you follow us there. We're also on Twitter at the TDU Podcast, as well as on YouTube at TouchDownUnder. And we also premiere our podcasts on Facebook at TouchDownUnder. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.